So there's a sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 20.4 called Pots of Food. It says, because if someone were to give away 100 pots of food as a charity in the morning, 100 pots of food as a charity at noon, and 100 pots of food as a charity in the evening, and if someone else were to develop a mind of friendliness, even for the time it takes to pull a cow's udder, either in the morning at noon or in the evening, this would be more fruitful than the former. Therefore, because you should train yourself thus, we will develop and cultivate the liberation of mind by friendliness, make it a vehicle, make it a basis, stabilize it, exercise ourselves in it, and fully perfect it. Thus you should train yourselves. So this refers to the practice of Metta, or how it's often translated as loving kindness. But it's really about a mind of friendliness that is sustained regardless of the circumstances. So the first thing that a person will realize is that, you can evoke an attitude of friendliness towards everyone, but it doesn't last, or it lasts only relatively speaking. Sooner or later, it will kind of drift into that abstract thinking of, you keep repeating to yourself friendliness and friendliness, but practically speaking your mind is very much not friendly. So how do you deal with that? How do you address that? Well, the reason why the mind doesn't listen to you is because, as the Buddha said, it's not pliable. So it hasn't been tamed enough. It hasn't been brought into your control, which means your sense restraint, guarding of the sense doors, and your watchfulness has not been sufficiently developed. So that's why, even if you were to understand how to cultivate the attitude, even if you could quickly evoke an attitude of friendliness, let's say it like that, it will not get established in your mind, because the mind is still not tamed to the extent necessary for those phenomena to take root, to take place, and then to stay enduring there. So that's why we often mention, regardless whether it's the metta practice or jhana practice or whichever other forms of samadhi you want to practice, that all has to come after your mind has been tamed and brought into a good degree of your control. So in other words, that the mind needs to start to listen to you. So whereby then, when you think the thoughts of friendliness, the mind will become the mind of friendliness. Now you can think the thoughts of friendliness, but it's just trying to layer over a mind that is very unfriendly. Or certainly, even if you make all the effort and constantly sort of dwell on thoughts of friendliness and thoughts of kindness, the mind kind of becomes indifferent towards it. And the reason for that is the mind has not been sufficiently developed on its own, has not been sufficiently tamed, which means you are still more influenced by your mind than your mind is influenced by you. And that's the problem, and that's why all these contemplations that the Buddha encourages monks to do pretty much apply to people that have already contained their mind in that right way. The mind of friendliness, say say somebody has tamed their mind sufficiently enough, they wouldn't need many specific instructions on how to do metta, because again, just a thought of friendliness for a well-trained mind that has been reined in, mind that obeys you and listens to you, mind that doesn't drift into sensuality, in a split second. It doesn't fall into ill will in a split second. All you need to do then is just remember a friendly attitude, regardless of the person, regardless of the specific man or a woman you were friendly to, and just take the phenomenon of friendliness and dwell on it. That's it. And the mind will then direct, or rather, the mind will then follow that direction, and it will be friendly towards anything and anyone, even people that are hostile. That doesn't mean that you would not perceive the hostility or bad behavior or foolish people around, but you will not have ill will towards them, because the direction of ill will is directly opposite of the direction of friendliness. And now, given that the mind that listens to you has already traveled far enough in the direction of friendliness, even when it faces something that's not really nice, a person or something like that, it will take a lot more effort to, go back now from that direction of friendliness into the direction of ill will and then have the ill will developed, than to just stay there and not change its framework of friendliness, regardless of the behavior of that person. So that's how you truly practice metta, and that's why Buddha said, it will lead to complete liberation of the mind. If you sustain it, the presence of that attitude of friendliness is completely, as I said, incompatible with the attitude of ill will, attitude of craving, acting out of your desires. So if friendliness is sustained, passion will diminish. And you can, again, it's not like you shouldn't be trying to practice this until you develop your mind, so that mind obeys you and listens to you and so on. But you do need to be aware that there is a certain order of things, how you develop them. So you can try and keep making effort to practice metta, but if you're not sustaining it, if the mind is not quite, as friendly as it should be, and if that framework of friendliness is not present throughout the day, it's not because metta is wrong or that meditation is not for you or something. No, it's because the mind has not been tamed enough. So it's not mutually exclusive. So it's not like, I will not do metta until I tame my mind. No, you can keep taming your mind and keep practicing metta, which will kind of at the same time serve as a criteria of how tamed your mind is. Because if you're not trying to direct your mind in, like, for example, in this example, in the direction of friendliness, you will not see how much it disobeys you. And that's the point. So you do try to practice this and then see if the mind disobeys you, which means, okay, so review things from the beginning. So is your virtue, up to the task? Has it been purified enough? Are you seeing the danger in the slightest fault? Are your precepts intact? Are you watchful generally of your intentions? And whereby you're choosing things out of desire, boredom, or ill will. And if so, if you recognize that there are blemishes there, how the Buddha say, okay, you correct it there in that regard, and then keep trying to develop the attitude of friendliness. Because if that taming of the mind is done, or when it is done properly, the attitude of friendliness will be much easier to establish, and it will last much longer on its own. So you can use that, like you can use the attempts at trying to practice friendliness correctly. You can use that pretty much as a kind of a measure of how much more your mind needs to be tamed. And then eventually, when there is no effort required for you to sustain the attitude of friendliness, regardless, as I said, of the circumstances, okay, so the mind now is quite pliable and it listens to me. And then you can choose other ways of developing your mind. You could start pondering on the first jhana or any other types of composure, and now the mind will be much more obedient, and all those subtle phenomena of these practices that would result in complete liberation of mind would become much more apparent, much more palpable. Let's put it that way. So, and you can also just use the similar. You can extrapolate this principle and apply it to anything you read in the suttas. So if things are not understood, or if they seem too abstract or too sort of far-fetched, that's because the mind is not quite on the level where you can understand those things. So the mind has not been tamed enough, has not been withdrawn from sensuality enough, has not been abstaining from acting out of desire long enough, and that's why these things are just abstract. That's just these distant ideas that you don't even see any basis for application in this experience here and now. But all that can change if the mind taming is gradually developed and sustained, and that's kind of the necessary order of things.